Hello, my friends. This is Elena Nikitina, the author of Girl Taken, a true story of abduction, captivity, and survival. Thank you for coming back to my channel. Today I'm going to read the third chapter, and if you like the book so far or if you don't, please leave me your feedback in comments. So let's get started. Chapter 3, October 1994, Grozny, Chechnya. I heard loud voices outside my room. There was something going on in the world just beyond my door. Someone knocked on that door sharply and without waiting for my permission or even a word from me, turned the key, opened the door, and abruptly entered the room. He looked around, but there was nowhere to sit other than the bed where I was, with my knees drawn up to my chin and my arms wrapped around them. I was leaning back against the thin carpet which covered the cool wall. I was wrapped in the oversized thick robe. Ever since I'd had this long robe, it served as my only protection from the outside world. I would hide in it, wrapping myself up so they could only see my head poking out the top. I did not have anything else in this ugly world, only this robe, a piece of worn-out fabric, and I used it as a shield. I knew it was dumb. The robe couldn't protect me from anything, not from bullets, not from the strong hands of the men if it came to that. But psychologically it helped. I felt safer wrapped inside it, like it could defend me from this armed mob of criminals. The man sat on the floor and tucked his knees under, as if he was kneeling to pray. He was stocky and short, with small jet-black eyes. His movements were quick and sudden. His dark eyes drilled into mine. He looked sly and dangerous. He had dark skin and the same closely cropped haircut as the other man. Black hair framed a face with sharp features. His beard, trimmed to half a finger wide, connected with the hair at his temples. His nose was slightly long with a pointed tip. He reminded me of a fox. His eyes were not kind, but very, very tricky. He was dressed in jeans and a light camouflage military jacket, unbuttoned and draped over a dark t-shirt. He put both hands on his knees, then lifted a hand and stroked his beard quickly. Everything he did was fast. "What's your name?" He spoke perfect Russian, but with a slight Chechen accent and some sort of strange whistling sound. The man had a speech impediment. His small black eyes were hard, and I felt the hatred in those eyes. I squeezed my arms around my knees even tighter. The blood in my veins froze. I didn't want to speak to this man. Very quietly I pronounced my name. Lena. He smiled a wicked smile, revealing small white teeth. It seemed that he was mocking me. It seemed that he would use those sharp teeth to eat me alive. "Well, Lena, are you scared?" He looked at me like a wolf looking at its prey before ripping it into pieces. My heart stopped beating. I was not even sure if I was still alive at all. "Don't be scared," he said. "You're in Grozny, in Chechnya. Your mother will give us the money we want, and then you will go home. Nobody here will hurt you." I stared at him. For a long moment I could not understand what he was saying. Slowly it dawned on me. They had abducted me for a ransom. Oh my God! He was still smiling, his eyes like lasers. "Your mother has our money. When she returns it, you'll go home. If she doesn't return it, you'll go home in pieces." I felt sick and dizzy, like I would fall over sideways. What kind of nonsense is this? I was kidnapped, and they were demanding a ransom, and it was money my mother had taken? This couldn't be right. Of course I had heard about all the horrible kidnapping cases that had happened lately. I had watched movies about the children of rich people being kidnapped. Recently, I had seen horror stories about cases of abduction on the TV news. It was terrible, Even more so because there must be some mistake. Kidnapping only happened to people who were associated with organized crime or to people who had a lot of money. Worse, in all the stories I had seen, none of the abductees were ever returned home alive. I was the only child in my family. My mother always worked hard as an accountant, and she was well paid. We lived an abundant life in the sense that we lacked nothing, but we were not even close to rich. My mom and my dad had divorced when I was in the 4th grade. I did not see my dad very often after that. He started another family and was busy with his new children. My mother remarried, and we had a very happy family. I accepted my stepdad and considered him my father. We traveled, had a lot of friends. We were the typical happy family. We may have lived a little better than average, but only because of my mom's and my dad's hard work and education. After my father died some time ago, my mom and I were left alone. Russia in the 1990s was wrecked by a monumental, earth-shattering change. After the disintegration of the Soviet Union, a new history began. No part of life was unaffected by it. The decade was so turbulent it became known as the Wild 90s. For 70 years, the central government had controlled and watched over every aspect of life. In the late 1980s, this control started to weaken. Suddenly, in 1991, the government collapsed and absolute freedom came. The Soviet people gradually turned into a horde of alcoholics, drug addicts, thieves, rapists, murderers, and maniacs. Until that time, all the vices and sins seemed to lurk behind the walls of a huge castle, imprisoned and held back by the all-powerful state. Once the state was gone, the ills of the world were set loose to run amok. The criminal world took advantage of the USSR's collapse, and the country spiraled downward into lawlessness and corruption. Wherever they could, criminal businesses drove out legitimate activities. Businessmen competed by killing each other. It was a terrible time, accompanied by a deep recession in the economy and a surge in inflation. In the 1990s, abductions for ransom became an established business practice. Bandit groups from many parts of the country engaged in it, especially Chechens. You could watch this play out nightly on the television news. Now, I no longer needed to watch it on TV. I was part of it. I sat in shock as I perceived the terrible news the man with the fox face dropped on me. How could it be? I was being held for ransom? Could not even imagine it. Even so, any hope that I had appeared here by accident collapsed. I was in captivity. I sat huddled in a lump of fear and utter helplessness. I was in a panic. I wanted to cry. I wanted to beat my head against this gray alien wall. I did not want to believe this was happening. The most terrible thought, the worst-case scenario, which I was trying to erase from my head all these days, turned out to be the absolute reality. There was no misunderstanding. These people had kidnapped me on purpose. They even knew who I was. The terrible thought had now even gained flesh and blood in the form of the fox-faced man. He had left the room as quickly as he entered it. I was depressed and exhausted. Money, how much were they asking? Would my mom be able to find this amount? In any case, it didn't matter. I wouldn't survive. The hostages were never returned. I covered my face with my hands, fell onto the flat and cold pillow, and burst into tears. I was utterly helpless. I had no influence on what was happening, and the recognition of this seemed to tear my very soul apart. I lay there with my knees tucked under me and my face down, wrapped in the huge robe. My tears flowed like a river, like a torrent, like the raging waters that come when the dam bursts, blocking me from breathing. I gasped for air. I felt so alone in this strange world, torn out of the water like a helpless fish and thrown ashore to die. Behind the door, the voices kept talking in their strange language. I could only guess at what they were saying. I just assumed and prepared for the worst. What could I do? I was not taught to survive in these conditions. I grew up surrounded by love and care and in the comfort of my sweet and warm home. I prayed for rescue. I knew that the work had already begun. My mom and Sergei had gone to the police, and soon they would send a force necessary for my release. I should be ready for when they came. Many times in the movies, I had seen how the commandos would use ropes to rappel down the sides of buildings, descending from the roof, smashing through the windows, saving the hostages, and shooting or arresting the kidnappers. I decided that to avoid getting shot in the crossfire, I could hide behind the bed, as long as I pushed it away from the wall a little bit in advance. Then, when the shooting stopped, I could quickly jump out the window into the waiting arms of the rescuers. The window. I had to explore the possibilities. In the dim light of the room, it was clearly visible what parts of the window were painted over less densely. To see through the gaps, I needed to get up onto the windowsill. I hoped that none of my abductors came into the room at that moment. I cautiously crept to the window and sat on the peeling windowsill. It took me a few seconds to silently climb on it and start to explore the edges of the weird, dark glass. Very quickly, my perfect plan for rescue, concocted entirely within my imagination, collapsed like a house of sand. Through a thin layer of black paint at the edge of the upper corner of the window, I could easily see the very recognizable landscape of a building courtyard. I had seen courtyards like this 1,000 times, with another 5-story building just across the street. In all of Russia, near the ground floor, the windows of buildings were grilled with iron bars to protect people's homes from being robbed. Each year, the criminal situation in Russia had worsened so that now the windows were barred all the way up to the 3rd floor. Instantly, I saw that the apartment where I was held was on the 1st floor. No commandos were going to be able to burst through the window, and there was no sense coming down from the roof. Anyone who was trying to rescue me would have to stand outside the building and try to cut the bars with an electric or gas-powered saw, a loud, time-consuming, and utterly ridiculous method for breaking in. No would-be rescuers were going to come crashing in that way. Through the paint and dust on the glass, I could see patches of trees with green and yellow leaves, spreading their branches under the autumn sun during what looked like a beautiful and perhaps warm Indian summer day. Until that moment, I hadn't even realized how totally I was in prison. I wanted very badly to get out of there. I wanted freedom, fresh air, pure nature. Why don't we appreciate the things that are given to us when we have them? I had never enjoyed the frequent picnics in the countryside with my parents. I did not like to go pick mushrooms in the forest, or go fishing, or even to spend a night in our small boat in the Volga River Delta. I thought of myself as an urbanite, a city person. I always preferred the comfort of my home over sleeping in a tent amid the inconvenient and uncomfortable outdoors. How I would love to be back out there in the wild right now. Would I ever experience it again? How much better it would be to be on the banks of the beautiful Volga River, or on our boat rushing through the waves in the delta. I would give anything to be there and not here. The tiny room, my cell, was dark and depressing. Everything about it seemed heavy and threatening. I wanted, with every fiber of my being, to feel sunlight and breathe fresh air again. A few days passed. I was trapped in a time warp. Every day was Groundhog Day. It did not come to an end, but transitioned to the next, looking exactly like the previous one. Short, dreamless nights turned into endless, pointless days, full of hope in the morning and sorrow by nightfall. I would prefer to never wake up at all until the day of my salvation. At night, I could not fall asleep for a long time, listening to every rustle from outside the window and behind the door. I was ready at any moment to run from this room into the arms of my rescuers. Most days, hope did not leave me. For a long time, I was absolutely certain that one dark night the special police forces, commandos, would storm into the building and save me. I was always ready for this moment. I would spend the whole day thinking about it, adrift in my imagination, developing possible plans for the rescue operation and how it might happen. I tried to picture it down to the smallest details so that at the night time I would be ready to help the rescuers to save me. It would not be easy. The terrorists were armed from head to toe. I imagined every single possible technical aspect of the operation, every likely scenario. It was going to happen very soon. I could afford to be patient because this strange time was bound to be brief. It would not last much longer. Certainly not too long to wait. I believed in this story, and I lived by it. It was my religion. But each succeeding morning I opened my eyes, and I cried at my own helplessness and at the unfairness of it all. I wanted to scream from the bottom of my lungs and go into hysterics, but I knew it would not help me. I kept struggling to remain silent, quiet and invisible. I was waiting for the rescue. I wished for this with all of my being. Day passed into day, like the links of an endless chain, a chain that soon stretched into weeks. Nothing changed, and still I hoped for salvation. Even though I never, not even for a second, wanted to get used to the idea that the present state of affairs was my destiny or my life, I still had to work out some way to organize my day. I had to have a schedule. Depression and loneliness helped me to some extent. I discovered that I had lost the taste for life, and I could lay down in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling without moving. In the freedom of my past life and being energetic by nature, I could not sit still. Now, all of that power seeped out of me, like air from an old tire. My current life consisted entirely of humiliating trips to the bathroom and back, twice a day. This well-worn path, back and forth, passing through the other room, offered me the only variety in my day, along with a glimpse of the outside world, the occasional sunlight coming through the windows covered with heavy curtains. Then, back into the dark room where I now lived and where time stopped. I tried to eat and drink as little as possible. I did not want to remind the men about myself. I knocked on their door only when it was absolutely necessary. I thought I would never get used to the bed, the food, and especially the bathroom. Everything in this place disgusted me. Because I knew I would live forever very soon, I tried to minimize contact with the strangers' belongings and toilet articles. There was never any hot water. After a few days without a normal shower, I learned how to take a shower using only the faucet and the sink. Since I knew that the door was guarded by an armed jailer and that he could come in at any second, I took my sink showers very quickly. Using only ice-cold water, I wiped my whole body with my lacy underwear and immediately put them back on to dry. After 2 or 3 weeks, I knew that there were always at least 2 armed men in the apartment. They all had weapons, mostly big machine guns. Besides the 3 guards, I would hear some other men come in. For periods of time, the space behind the door was filled with voices. Near the window in the bigger room, there was a large stack of the guns and ammunition. It looked like they were preparing for the war. The room was furnished minimally. It did not seem to be owned by anyone. There were no extraneous things that might be the sign of the owner, except for a rolled mattress leaning against the wall. I began to get the impression that there was only one permanent resident there, me. The men who guarded me rotated and were replaced every once in a while. Another place from which I could observe the outside world were the painted glass window in my room. I often climbed on the window sills and looked through the slits of the thin layers of paint. I did not notice a single person nearby. The streets, blurry as they were, seemed completely deserted. But even if I did see someone eventually, what could I do? Yell for help? That wouldn't work. The first ones to hear my scream would be the people behind the door. They would tape my mouth shut and tie me up. So I could not act recklessly. I had to come up with another plan. The Foxman came again a few days later. I sat on the bed, leaning against the wall, and remained silent, staring at a single point on the gray wallpaper. What could I do? The last remnants of my body's inner strength boiled inside of me, ready to explode in rage at my own helplessness. The man crouched on the end of the bed and spoke cheerfully as if he was telling me not to be upset about a lost hairpin. "Don't worry," he said. "Nobody will hurt you. In a couple of weeks you'll go home." I was infuriated by his tone. I wanted to wrap my hands around his throat and clench it in my grip just to shut him up. The ruthless bastard. He didn't even seem aware that he and his gang had committed a crime against a human being, a crime that would leave a painful and permanent mark on the rest of my life, even if I went home right now. 2 weeks. I could barely last a few more minutes in this prison. I didn't answer him. I was too choked up from outrage. I was going to handle these days stoically, but to do so, I at least needed some hygiene items. I asked him for a toothbrush and a tube of toothpaste. I also mentioned something that was very much on my mind. "The bathroom has no toilet paper," I said. I didn't want to complain. I just wanted to live my last few days with some dignity, some small amount of comfort, and without their anger escalating. "Muslims don't use toilet paper," he said. "We use the jug of water." I nodded. I already knew this answer and was ready for it. Okay, there wasn't going to be any toilet paper. Beyond the lack of toilet paper, the trips to the bathroom themselves were a real torture for me. It was humiliating to knock on the door each time and ask permission to answer my basic natural needs. I was not an animal, I was a human being. Asking to use the bathroom, then being shadowed down the hallway by an armed man, it tested my will and my sanity. And every day I had to pass this outrageous test. I felt abandoned to survive on the island of a cannibal tribe. I did not know their language and I could not predict what would happen to me next. They were from another world. They had their own customs, with which I was obliged to comply. Why was this happening to me? Privacy is a treasure, one I did not even know I had until it was stolen from me. To live at gunpoint and under constant surveillance, how long can a person endure such a life before she goes insane? I did not want to touch the food anymore. I tried to drink as little as possible to keep my forays to the bathroom at a minimum. I had to suffer for a few more days, and that was it. I forced myself to believe them when they said I would soon go home. But the next few days turned into an eternity of waiting. I waited and wished with all my heart and wanted to believe that in a few days I would be home. A life of freedom looks completely different when you think about it while in captivity. The prisoner thinks, when I'm free again, I'll never waste another moment of it. When I made it home, I would embrace every second of my freedom. I would hug the people dearest to me, my mother and Sergei. I would never argue with them. I would always be kind and considerate of them. I was going to live my life differently. My decision not to eat or drink anything soon had to change. I was losing strength. I could feel it ebbing from my body. I had been stashing the pita bread which they brought me every day in a drawer. I could not survive without fuel, so I took a big piece of the bread and ate it. Nothing had ever tasted so good. And then came the black day, or rather the red day. I started my period, as if things were not bad enough. Treacherous natural processes of the body threatened my already precarious existence. What was I going to do? Knock on the door and ask if they have a few tampons to share? I had to find a way to deal with it myself, and I found it. The sheet that covered the mattress on the bed was quite thick. Ripping it with my bare hands was not easy. I struggled for a while, my hands and wrists becoming sore from the effort, but finally the dense linen succumbed and I was able to pull apart 2 long strips. I made 3 rolls. The pads were bulky and uncomfortable, but still better than nothing. My thin panties could barely contain a huge chunk of the rolled fabric. My body brought me untold difficulties, either hunger or thirst or need to go to the bathroom. Now I had another one. Why wouldn't my body go into hibernation? Why wouldn't it switch to an extreme mode and abandon its natural needs, at least temporarily? Everything would be much easier. At least now I knew why I was here. I was aware that at any moment everything could change. I could be traded for money, or I could be rescued by the police. Or, knowing that they could not get their money, the Chechens could cut my body into pieces and send the pieces home. Or they could just kill me, at the time of the money transfer or instead of it. Holding my breath, I would creep to the door and listen to them talking, trying to guess what they were saying by the manner of their speech or the tone of their voices. Everything was useless. Their language had nothing in common with the Russian language, except for a few words that were international. Time dragged by. I did not know what to do with myself. When I could no longer lay down, I would stand up and walk in circles in the tiny room. The people behind the wall lived a life of their own. I heard the door open sometimes, and someone would come into the apartment. Sometimes the voices I heard seemed far away. Most likely they were in the kitchen. They would debate some point or laugh at some joke. Sometimes they were right in the next room, probably sitting on the couch, very close. It always seemed like they were about to enter my room and do something terrible to me. Despite the fact that I had felt a sense of fear every second, every minute, every hour, all day, every day, and it accompanied me from the very first moments of the kidnapping, I could not adapt to it. It paralyzed me over and over again, as if for the first time. It was impossible to control. I would never be able to get used to it. Every human being feels a sense of fear throughout life. Fear, it's a mechanism that warns us of danger. A man is afraid of loneliness, and this makes him to search for a partner. The fear of hunger drives him to search for food. The fear of death, it binds us and compels us to act or obey. I was not afraid of sudden death in these circumstances. The torture and the abuse frightened me much more. The fear for loved ones is the most intolerable fears of all. It corrodes your soul and destroys your well-being. I was terribly afraid for my mom, who must be suffering and could not know how to help me. I feared for her sanity. As hard as I tried, I could not leave the illusion of salvation and a happy return home. I did not believe them. I knew that kidnappers did not work cheap. They had demanded a great deal of money. which would never be found. It couldn't be found. My mother simply did not have it. I was afraid that they would cut off parts of my body one at a time and send them by mail as a warning. I would prefer 100 instant deaths over torture. I remembered the story that I naively thought was terrible enough. When I was in high school, we went by train on a school field trip to the so-called Golden Ring cities of Russia. In Suzdal, we visited the famous historical village where all the details of the life of the previous century had been recreated. We tasted the water that had been carried from the well. We ate the bread baked in the special ovens. In general, we were trying to feel the lives of the boyars and the serfs. Along with all sorts of interesting sights from the 1800s, our school travel group visited a nearby lake. There was the great centuries-old oak tree growing on the shore, spreading its huge, heavy branches just above the water. A rope swing with a wooden seat dangled from one of the heaviest branches. It was the same type of swing the boyars' children used in days of old. The swing was not a tourist attraction, but of course everybody wanted to take a ride over the lake on it. The rope was long. When someone sat on the swing, another would pull it back and then, with a hard push, launch it away from the shore, the person on the swing flying 20 feet out over the lake before safely swinging back to dry land. Each of the students waited impatiently for their turn to experience this incredible flight over the huge pond of water. Finally, my turn came. I clung with both hands to the rope and closed my eyes in excitement. One of my classmates drew back the seat and let it go. The feeling of free flight over the lake was indescribable. I felt weightless like a bird, especially the moment when I realized that something had gone wrong. The rope had broken and was not attached to the oak anymore. I flew over the pond. I'll never forget that feeling, that experience with the terror of the unknown, and plunged into the water, still holding the rope and sitting on the swing. Splash! I opened my eyes. The ceiling of the dismal room appeared above my head. I was still here. I remembered how I swam back to the shore and into the hands of the teachers who accompanied and supervised us. Needless to say, the pond was not intended for diving. I was lucky enough not to come across the branches sticking out of the water and pierce my stomach. The teachers were scared. God forbid one of their students should get hurt on their watch. And I was scared, more so than they were. I borrowed dry clothing from my friends. Luckily, some of them were wearing several layers. On the train, on the way back home, we were a gaggle of teenagers laughing and shouting about the incident. Time passed in torment. I was trapped, imprisoned. My personal space was reduced to a few square feet, bounded by the four walls of a gloomy room. I was surrounded by people I did not choose, I could not understand, and who I nevertheless had to deal with. I was lonely for my mother and my boyfriend. The possibility of being subjected to violence at any moment slowly drove me insane. I was a bundle of nerves on the one hand, and on the other, I was indulging a fantasy that all of this would end in a few days. I knew the room inside out. The faded wallpaper told me that it hadn't always been dark in here. Some time ago, when the windows were not blacked out, these walls were getting enough sunlight to bleach out the color of the wallpaper. Near the windows, you could still see the original color. It was an ugly light brown. Perhaps it wasn't that bad under natural light. The dim light from the ceiling lamp made the color look worse. I had decided to give the light a try after a few days. It hung lonely on an exposed wire and shone a dead color of light, and revealed a dismal room, the prison where I lived. The yellowish wallpaper, in some places stripped away, matte brown painted moldings at the bottom. The floor was covered by an old gray carpet. The only furniture was the narrow bed and a bedside table near the window. By far, the most interesting item in the whole room was an old, sharp cassette tape recorder. It even had an unlabeled cassette inside of it, the kind of tape you record songs onto yourself. It took me a while before I dared turn it on and check what was recorded on it. I fully expected to press the button and hear songs in Chechen language. I didn't want to hear more. I had enough of Chechen language in my life. I was so wrong. It was the Gypsy Kings. The band played searing flamenco music. They were so popular in my hometown, you could hear them playing from every speaker. Their passionate love songs were listened to by everyone, despite the fact that nobody could speak or understand a word of Spanish. You were so swept away by the feeling of the songs, you did not need to know what the words meant. I listened to that tape over and over, very low in volume, bringing the speaker close to my ear. I would listen to one side, flip the tape, listen to the other side, flip it again, and keep going. Late at night, in the total darkness, when the apartment was silent, the Gypsy King's beautiful and melodic songs played in my room, reminding me of my happy times, while I cried quietly for hours. As weeks passed, during my short outings to the bathroom, I observed the environment and the people. In my own mental notebook, I classified the gang and assigned a nickname to every member I saw. There were about 10 men who were often in the apartment. They rotated in and out. The man with the fox face, who I started to think of as Foxy, and the man I called Shorty, were the only ones who spoke to me. Maybe they were the only ones who could speak Russian. The men were calm and treated me well enough, as if they had been ordered not to damage the goods. All except for Shorty. He seemed like he could barely restrain himself from violence. He made mean-spirited comments about me, my mother, and my boyfriend. He made comments about Russians in general. Sometimes he wrapped them all into one. "You dumb bitch," he said, lingering at my door, a vicious smile on his ugly face. "Where's your boyfriend? He hasn't come to save you yet? Don't you know he's off with another Russian slut by now? You're all the same anyway. And what about your mama? A dumb old soul, she does not care about you. She is happy that you don't bother her anymore. All you Russians, it makes me sick to think of you." Sometimes he spoke in Chechen, causing wild laughter among the gangsters present in the apartment. I did not respond to anything he said. In my imagination, I saw him burning in hell. I will go home soon. I would sit silently all day trying to delay my bathroom visits until the least amount of gunmen remained in the apartment. Gradually, I lost track of the amount of time I was there. Besides the fear and the other emotional hardship, the shortage of simple things like water took its toll on me. I felt disgusting. I tried to keep myself clean as possible by bathing in the sink, but it was no good. I needed to take a shower. Shorty's cruelty meant that I could not overcome my fear and speak seriously with him. I was sure that after learning about my desire to take a shower, he would scoff at this and not allow me to do it. He would take pleasure in my discomfort. He would destroy me with his brutal jokes. The other guards seemed too scary to talk to, or clearly did not speak Russian. The only candidate was Foxy. He appeared in the apartment mostly in the evenings. My desire to get home was overwhelming. I missed my mom so much, and I missed my life. I dreamed that when I got home, I would take a long shower, enjoying every second under the warm and clean water. In the mornings, I would cuddle up in a plush towel afterward my shower and drink hot, delicious coffee. The ordinary things that we barely notice in the course of our daily hustles, I miss them so much. My hair was turning into straw, and my body had forgotten what soap was. The bathtub in this apartment was not suitable for using. The shower head was missing, and there was no shower curtain. No one had taken a shower here for years, but the bathtub itself still had a rusty faucet. I did not feel aversion anymore. I just wanted to bathe. I had to talk to someone. I could no longer do otherwise. I waited for the evening. Standing at the door, I listened to the voices behind it. When at last I heard a whistling voice, the speech impediment of the foxy man, I knocked. It was late now, and the lonely dim bulb burned from the ceiling, dimly lighting my wretched home. Foxy opened the door and looked at me with a question in his dark eyes. "Tell me," he said. "Listen, I realize that I'm a prisoner here, but I'm also a human being. I haven't taken a shower in weeks. Do you mind if I take a shower? I could use a bottle instead of the shower. All I need is a little bit more time in the bathroom, the towel, and shampoo." I blurted it all very quickly and in one breath. I was afraid that he would not listen until the end and just slammed the door in my face. After I spoke, there was a long moment of silence between us. I waited for his response. "We'll see," he said finally, then shut the door in my face. He did not say no. That was good. The next day, as usual, one of the men brought me food. Along with the pita bread, I found a plastic bag that contained a clean towel and a half bottle of shampoo. I took this as an approval to use the bathtub. Foxy had taken pity on me. I waited impatiently all day for nighttime to arrive. In the evening, he turned up himself. His head popped inside the door. "You can take a shower right now." I grabbed my simple belongings and went to the bathroom. Foxy escorted me. There were other people in the apartment. I did not worry about them. My thoughts were filled with the rusty bathroom. I held my breath as I opened the hot tap, hoping that this one time something warm would flow from it instead of the icy cold stream I was used to. It was a privilege here. In all my days there so far, I had gotten lucky just a few times, taking my sink shower and washing my dress under a stream of warm water. None of this really surprised me. In Russia, a country with gigantic amounts of resources, a place with endless natural gas reserves, there were always problems with the hot water, and shutdowns of all supplies were not uncommon. It was akin to the Brazilians or the Colombians having a coffee shortage. I unscrewed the faucet all the way. Apparently, the hot water god had mercy on me, because a lukewarm trickle flowed from the tap. There was more than enough for me. I had brought an empty bottle with me. The shower head might be missing, but the bottle was suitable for the task. I stepped over the bath rim inside the tub. I poured the entire bottle of warm water over my body. The feeling put me in a state of complete delight. I emptied the bottle over and over again, refilling it from the flowing tap each time. I could not stop. My pores hungrily absorbed the long-awaited moisture. It takes so little to make a human being happy. A few weeks before, I couldn't have imagined living a day without taking a shower. The thought alone would make me depressed. Then again, prior to this ordeal, I had no idea what real depression was. I spent an eternity in that rusty bathtub, pouring water and shampoo all over my body. No one disturbed me. I felt so refreshed. It brought me a sense of physiological cleansing. But nothing could cleanse the mess inside me. There was no balance, no peace. I was deprived of the most basic things in my life, but I was almost ready to accept that. I could live without them. But it was impossible to accept my lack of freedom, and to bear the separation from my loved ones was beyond my strength. November 1994, Astrakhan, Russia. For the mother, life had ceased to have meaning. After the first call, she had rushed to the police station with her story about the kidnappers and the ransom. She was a bookkeeper by profession. She remembered that day 3 months ago, perfectly, to the smallest detail. The company where she worked as a lead accountant received notification from the central bank to cash out a sum of money for a client. The amount was colossal, and she had a very bad feeling about it. Fraud was widespread since the collapse of the Soviet Union. She'd heard rumors of a new scam, the fake visa fraud, or air money fraud. The scheme was simple. The aviso was a bank transfer notice. The central bank would receive an aviso declaring that in the next 2 weeks they would be wired a certain amount of money from Chechnya or another faraway region to be transferred into the account of a particular company or enterprise. Although the money had not yet arrived, the banking system, still based on the old Soviet system, operated on trust. The accountant of the company receiving the funds in 2 weeks would have to cash out the money and give it to the client right away. But the reimbursement funds, supposedly traveling by the mail or by courier, would never come. Bank balances were only adjusted once a month or once a quarter, giving the crooks plenty of time to spend or hide the money. On that day 3 months ago, the woman had gone to the central bank with her suspicions. She decided not to cash out the unconfirmed amount in her local bank right away, but wait until the money arrived from Chechnya to the central bank. Of course, it didn't arrive. Now she was positive that her daughter had been taken because of the failed scam. The bandits hadn't gotten their money, and now they were demanding compensation for damages. The investigator pretended not to believe the grief-stricken woman and tried to get rid of her. The cops did not want to deal with the terrorists and their jurisdiction. It was too difficult for them, this new type of crime. "Okay, ma'am, I promise you, we're working on it. If your daughter's missing, we'll find her." The woman wanted to grab the cop by the shoulders and shake him. She wanted to shout in his face if that's what it took to reach him. She wanted to fall to her knees on the dirty floor in front of him and pray to God that this man understands her. Instead, she went home. She was not looking for sympathy from relatives and friends. She needed professional help in the investigation of the kidnapping. Help from people who knew what they were doing. She spent several days going from one office to another, trying to find the support of the authorities and get them to help her. Russia has always been a bureaucratic meat grinder that slowly but surely destroyed people's lives. People were fed into one end, relatively whole and sane, and eventually they were spit out the other side, brainwashed, their bones and souls crushed, their spines ripped out and cast aside. When you were happy, you always believed you were surrounded by a huge number of people who would stand up for you when needed. Once something terrible happened, the next moment the number of people around you was noticeably reduced, and soon you have no one and you are alone with your grief. All you have to do is believe. Faith in God becomes the only thing that you can hope for in a moment of total and all-embracing despair. The more hopeless the situation, the stronger the faith becomes. In everyday chaotic vanity, we rarely think about the soul and are closed from dialogue with God without distinguishing the warnings sent from above. In a period of loss and emotional pain, the mental organization becomes so vulnerable and hypersensitive, which makes it possible to acutely sense messages and signs of blessing. Faith is justified and it is strengthened. Although the depth of God's providence is incomprehensible to the human mind, we gratefully receive the rewards sent to us for support. We find them where we expect them the least. The woman was positive that the FSB officer, Vladimir, was sent to her from the above. She met him in an investigation arm of the state, what many people thought of as the secret police. Sincere and honest, the man understood the pain of a mother who had lost a child. He procured and installed a surveillance device on her telephone and assisted her to get help from authorities. They finally launched an investigation to catch the kidnappers. Vladimir took the woman to meet with an elder of the Chechen diaspora in the city, an old man from one of the most respected clans in Chechnya, where family and clan ties are everything. The man listened to the woman's story and slowly nodded. "It isn't right," he said. "They're young and foolish, but they will listen to me. I will go to Chechnya and meet with them. They will release the girl." The old man showed the confidence of someone who enjoys high esteem in his community. Taking advantage of his age and respect, he was sure that his admonitions will act on the bandits. He decided himself to negotiate with the kidnappers and rescue the girl from captivity. End of the 3rd chapter. To be continued. Once again, thank you for your time. Don't forget to tell me what you think in comments. Bye for now, be well, and peace to all.